Hello again, everyone. The Hearth Guy here. And let me ask you, what is a hero without a villain? Or in this case, villains? While a truly great hero can stand on their own feet just fine, their finest qualities are accentuated and tested by the villains that they must contend with on a regular basis. Whether it's their skills, their ideals, or somewhere in between, a proper roster of baddies can excel at challenging the player and the hero. These rogues galleries of foes are natural extensions of the heroes they face off against, and are as essential as the heroes themselves, and it is especially fun when you get to take the reins yourself and put them down in ways that only video games can. I will be judging these bosses off the following. They must have an actual link between them, even if only superficially. They must be actual characters too. It's hard to consider the monsters in Monster Hunter as a proper rogues gallery, and they're all just glorified wild animals. And of course, they don't have to be the only villains or group of villains in the game. You can always have variety, but I want to focus on the singular groups for now. Also, just assume that there will be spoilers from here on out. You have been warned. With all that out of the way, let's move on to the top 5 rogues galleries in video games. In the early days of gaming, villains and heroes were about as one note as you could get. Now, they became more complex as time went on and eventually grew into full-blown characters, but there were ways that the early games could make both heroes and villains stand out. One way is to sort of categorize them, make each boss specifically unique from each other and therefore more memorable. Mega Man took this to its natural conclusion and made every boss have their own character themes. You know 'em, you love 'em, you've killed them more times than you can count. They're the Robot Masters. From the beginning of Mega Man, the ever-expansive gang of bots gone bad that the Blue Bomber had to contend with is largely able to be memorable and colorful with just design alone. Each one has their own basic backstory, but that isn't the most memorable part about them. No matter how many times they reuse elements or styles, each Robot Master is unique in both playstyle and level beforehand. This allows each Robot Master to give off a different vibe and never lets them blend into each other. While some are boring, irritating, or otherwise, as an overall experience, the Robot Masters are perhaps the true MVPs of Mega Man. Mega Man himself doesn't have a lot of personality, especially in the early games, but the Masters are each fun enough to add a bit of flavor to each game. They're at the bottom, however, due to the fact that while they are a colorful bunch, they're also lacking in plenty of character. It's very much a quantity over quality sort of situation. That means that they're a rather superficial group. I mean, does it really matter that Gutsman was a construction robot? No. Or that Starman explores space? Not really. Either way, they're the cornerstone of Mega Man. Both he and gaming would be different and likely lesser without them. What makes a really good rogues gallery? Is it the chemistry between its members or between the members and the hero? I'd say that the answer varies, but giving you a good motivation to want to fight them goes a long way towards making them memorable. What better way than to tap into that basic human response of anger when you see injustice? Humans are social creatures, and hardwired to recognize right and wrong. So a great way to enforce motivation to beat an enemy or group of enemies is to watch their criminal deeds firsthand, so that you can act like Batman and enforce vigilante justice in their brains. I love Persona. Persona 5 has a wide range of antagonists, but most of them are actually part of a single hidden organization in one way or another. Even those who aren't directly members are connected to them in some way. This organization is headed by Masayoshi Shido, the antagonist for the majority of the game. Every step of the way his impact is felt. Kamoshida, our first and debatably one of the most despicable targets, worked at a school that was under Shido's influence. Madarame, Kanashiro, and Okumura, our second, third, and fifth bosses respectively, were financiers for Shido's group. Our fourth palace ruler, Futaba, was a victim of Shido's plans, and the boss you fight in her palace is the mental image of her mother, who was murdered on Shido's orders. Even Sai, our sixth boss, is unwittingly being used by him to take down the Phantom Thieves. And while not a palace ruler, Akechi is essentially Shido's attack dog, who betrays us and tries to kill us multiple times. All of these antagonists and all of these bosses are ultimately just part of the greater whole, manipulated to be our enemies by Shido. While admittedly some of these are a bit loose, they're all part of the ever-growing web of conspiracies headed by Shido and his lackeys. and it all comes to a head with the fight against Shido himself. A climactic showdown between our protagonist, who himself is a victim of Shido's evils, and the most arrogant man alive. It's pretty obvious, but for those of you who play the game, you may actually notice a pattern with the bosses. Each represents either one of the current 7 deadly sins or one of the original deadly sins such as vanity. Kamoshida is lust, Madarame is vanity, Kaneshiro is gluttony, Futaba is either sloth or wrath depending on what you believe, Okumura is greed, Sai is envy, and of course Shido is pride. While only in hindsight, it is rather satisfying to realize that you're systematically tackling all of the worst vices of man incarnate in your goal to bring about change. Good old vigilante justice. Works every time.
Seems the ignorant masses are doomed to remain as such.
You know what I said about motivation? Well, how about we make that more personal? How personal, you may ask? How about once being your allies before framing the murder of your country's leader on you, murdering your wife, kidnapping your daughter, throwing you from orbit, and then sending you to what is effectively hell for 1200 years? Oh ho ho, Kratos, eat your heart out. The 7 deities are the primary antagonists of Ashura's Wrath, which is an absolutely insane game that makes my heart race due to the sheer amounts of adrenaline pumping through every major battle. After the previously mentioned orbital drops straight into the underworld, the titular Ashura is in desperate need of some good old-fashioned revengeance, and boy is he gonna get it. Ashura's Wrath is essentially like playing an action anime, with all the bombastic and world-shattering moments that you'd expect. And the chance to beat these guys down is what makes it all worth it. We have everything. We have a god bigger than the earth trying to poke you to death. We have a fight against your rival where you're armless. You've got a slightly deranged mentor who stabs you with a sword that is longer than the planet is wide. If you're talking memorable, this bunch takes the cake. I somehow doubt you'll be forgetting when you turn Kaoro into a metal sandwich. Speaking of the deities themselves, each one is exceptional in their own way. Wyzen is a bombastic moron who talks a big game and has one of the most overwhelmingly over-the-top first boss fights I have ever seen. Kalro is a conniving and cowardly old man who will taunt you from a distance until you crash through his fleet to get to him personally. Yasha is the previously mentioned rival who becomes a secondary protagonist halfway through, and who you play as to fight Ashura, the actual protagonist when he's in rage mode, and one of the cleverest twists on the rival boss fight I have ever seen. August is, well, August. He spends his morning in a hot spring and ends it with a fistfight on the moon. Need I say more? Sergei admittedly doesn't do much more than mock Yasha and get killed by Ashura in a cutscene, but his presence serves as a useful antagonist for Yasha's side of the story. Same for Olga, who is directly responsible for Ashura going into rage mode in the first place. And of course, last but definitely not least, Deus, the leader of the 7 deities and the one that started this whole shebang off. Technically 2.5 episodes, the game calls its levels episodes if you needed more of the anime comparisons, are dedicated to fighting Deus, which starts with what is essentially a glorified cutscene with QuickTime events, but that's most of the game, so I'll cut it some slack. The rest, however, is sheer thrill with a fight between both Yasha and Ashura against Deus that escalates to Deus piloting a planet-sized mech that you have to fly up to on Yasha's space motorcycle before continuing the fight in 2 phases, one as Ashura and one as Yasha. The thrills start coming and they don't stop coming with this bunch. Every interaction hammers home both the power of the deities and the reasons why you have to bring them down. Preferably with as much screaming as possible.
Charging at whatever is in front of you can save the world?
I've gone on about motivation, memorability, and variety in every band of antagonists, but as we approach the end, I think the ones that really work the best are those that blend them all together. It can be hard to make large casts of villains without them all becoming one-note and forgettable. However, one game I can name managed to find a way to circumvent that, making every single one easy to remember and unique in design and encounter. And you don't have to remember a bunch of names either, because they all have one letter. Am I overly obsessed with Xenoblade 3? Yes. Yes, I am. Moving on. The primary enemy faction in Xenoblade 3 and the singular reason for, well, everything that goes wrong in the world of Ionios is Mobius. Every time you encounter a member of Mobius, you know it's going to be a wild ride. Each one is their own colorful character that straddles the line between comically villainous and genuinely threatening. However, they're not all painted with the same brush. Xenoblade gets creative with these guys, more often than not. Mobius Y is a Shakespearean villain in a pseudo-sci-fi world. Mobius R is a wannabe tactician who has an impressive amount of anger towards the optional party member Ashura. And Mobius V shows up in more cutscenes than any non-main story Mobius and has the best voice acting ever.
I will never turn back! I will cut through!
And with the intensity of the Mobius battle theme always accompanying them, it makes every boss fight against them feel like it's a final boss. They all function differently as well. One might poison you, another will deal copious amounts of burn damage, and yet another might start spawning minions to attack you. Mobius has all the variety of the Robot Masters, as I mentioned before, then some. All the personality you could ever want, too, and more than enough motivation to fight them. While the Mobius themselves don't interact with each other a ton, the times they do also help to get a feeling for the kind of people they are. And you can learn that each and every one of them is a different kind of messed up. Whether they're just outright psychopaths, pirates with dementia, or an actual little old granny that's out to recreate Darwinism the fun way, there's some screwed up folks in this collection of crazies that work together to be some of the hammiest, wildest, and most remarkable villains in gaming.
Unavoidable tragedy in order to preserve the endless now.
The Four Hounds, Fire Emblem Engage. A colorful crew of marginally deranged folks that each lend themselves to the overall theme of family in Engage. In this case, a very dysfunctional one. The Demigods, Elden Ring. Titanic obstacles in your path that each hold a shared history, even if only a few are actually very personable. But Radon alone carries this whole squad, just as he should. Okay, I'm gonna be 100% honest with you. From a pure objective standpoint, Mobius probably should be up here. However, I am incredibly biased. Metal Gear Rising: Revengeance is and will remain in my mind as a glorified boss rush, with some of the best designed fights in all of gaming. But if it was only the boss fights I was looking for, then this list would look very different. I'm also looking for personality. Does Metal Gear Rising's Desperado fit the bill?
Means the DNA of the soul.
Yes. Now this is character. This is art. We have personality aplenty over here. Desperado and the Winds of Destruction are just a delightfully deranged bunch. But they're more than just that. Revengeance isn't a long game, so they had to pile on plenty of that character into their dedicated boss songs, which each have fitting lyrics. A thing which I wish more games had, honestly. Through their limited screen time and the music accompanied, each boss fight becomes a 1-2 punch of memorability and just plain fun. How could I ever hope to forget the first time we see that rightfully smug gift to gaming that is Jetstream Sam, or the rather disarming fight that he gives us immediately afterwards. Blade Wolf teaches you how to play the game after you get played by the game while fighting him. You then take that information to Miss Straw so she can, whatever that is. Where the more games I cover, the more YouTube will be breathing down my neck. After a short detour to a less interesting boss and level, we are greeted by an infinitely memorable boss.
Means the DNA of the soul.
Besides being the funniest character in the world, Monsoon also reminds you why magnets are actually terrifying before you make sure that he gets ahead in life. Sundowner is the reddest-blooded American warmonger stereotype that you could possibly create, and I am living for it. With one of the most satisfying boss fights to finally get the hang of, even if there's a chance you never get to that second phase. After Sundowner, it is a non-stop ride of insanity and heart-pounding action as you have a Wild West standoff against Jetstream Sam, and this time, you're making sure he gets the point. I can't stop with the jokes. I'm too far gone. Even then, there's little time to breathe as we immediately head off against the man, the meme, the legend, Senator Stephen Armstrong. What can I say about this meme machine that hasn't already been said 1,000 times over? He's the star of the show. People play the game just so they can hear him speak, and they quit the game because his raging fist of Murica beats you down into the dirt. Is it any wonder why this game is so well regarded? With a story like this, the right cast of antagonists was necessary, and these delivered. Fun and memorable, fantastically memeable, and for all intents and purposes, the quintessential Rogues Gallery.
Wanna know why? I have a dream.
I am the Hearth Guy, and it has been a pleasure as always. Check out any of my other videos you may enjoy, and please like, comment, and subscribe to stay up to date with my latest work. And I will see you all next time around the hearth.